Tonight in Makai, brother Zam Kirmun, he'll lead us in singing. So we'll sing a song that was selected by Brother Benson yesterday, but we didn't have a chance to sing, so we'll sing that today. Right after our singing, I request Brother Russ to take the time. So Brother Russ, in second class, I continue there. After the second class, I would like to request our beloved Brother Benson to say a prayer for the tea and the tea break.
That's one of my favorite hymns. Not only is it a hymn about yearning to be with God in prayer, poetically it describes us wanting to be there because that is where we get our consolation, that's where we get our comfort. Y'all have an extra verse in there that I don't have in my app. But it is still, that last verse is in a lot of our hymns at home. My brother Craig helped put together a hymnal. And if I understand the fourth verse in our version, talks about the time when we won't need prayer.
I
don't know if the last two phrases in your song was like this. It talks about shedding your fleshly body, flying through the air, and saying farewell to prayer. We will not need it anymore. Okay. want to continue our study in the book of Job.
Job lai bu isim na ka isun zom no dinga.
I had a difficult time when I taught these at home to finish them in 10 lessons.
Hiai tong ke sai kha ko lama ka gen chiang ina sin lai som a leng ka gen nok teng teng ka gen zo nge ke ya.
And last year in Mumbai, I taught them in 8.
Ni ku mina Mumbai a ka sin lai giat in ka gen na.
And this year, I'm going to do them in 4.5.
Tu dia hiai ku ma ka sin lai li le ki ma zok som ka hi.
So I twisted Nathan's arm and said, could I use part of yours to do my last lesson?
Punau pa ne ten kha nge ni na eng bol na hun te akim khat be ka jang the diam kana chia.
And he said he would rather draw pictures on the wall, but he said, okay.
Ele ahu che le ken kha hiai abang mi le mai ka gel dimo kon chia. Hi le na u ta le jang inon chia.
Well, I would like to sit at his feet and listen to him going through the book of Hebrews. I'm sure that's been a really good treat for you.
Hi ma le ama thu gen ngai ya hiai ya tu a Hebrew lai bu asim khat ke le ka ngai lo ma wai ka no le phatu am ding ka
He's an
ta.
excellent Bible student.
Ama kha Bible sim student with ma khata hiya.
And I don't know if you can tell, but he's passionate about his learning.
Ama ahin atugena na panathe do ma chi ka the ki a hi le Bible asim chang asu na kha apu dan kha muk the hi.
So let's look at changing gears and looking at the life of Job.
Hiya ya kha zok hin khwa a igen sa ti a ki pan hung ki he tok na a om dan kha igen binga.
I'm calling this lesson Weighty Insights or Heavy and Deep Thoughts of a Tormented Soul.
Tu jing kala igen na dinga kha hiya kha gil ta ka muk chat na kon chia ama khalung kha ma get take ta kam a khai kha huai take chat na amu kha.
You know, there are people that I like to hear preach.
Mi khen khat kha thu ge nu ka ngai nuam ma oma.
And there are people that I like to hear their views on things.
Unau khen khat kha khen khat isu khen khat bang ngai dan ane di o chi kha ka the nuam ma oma.
But when they go through the very difficult circumstances, their whole attitude changes.
Hi ma le wai ngai dan tuam nei te ahin ko wat thil hak sa na tak ta kon tu chia una alung simu ki he ve kai.
My son, who is 40 years old, is a very funny man.
Ka ta papa kha kum som lia upa kha chiam ni hat ma kha ta hiya.
I don't know where he gets that, but he's very funny.
Ama kha bang tin ake na thei do ma chiam ni hat hat ma minuam ma hiya.
But 2 years ago, he lost his daughter,
Hi ma le kum ni pai sai na atanu ahon su na
5 years old.
kum nga upa hiya.
He's still funny, but there is a change about him.
Achiam ni hat na tu asun zom tu ahi le ni da na achiam ni hat na tu ahi wa akhi kamwai.
He goes through life thinking differently.
Wai ziaken wai ahak sat nain kha khove thil amu dan kha akhi na kha ama hin huwa amu chia ai.
And sometimes when we're in the same room looking at something, I see him seeing it differently.
Room khada ka om khom chiang wa thil khat ka et khom chiang mun le ke et dan to ama et dan anaki bang non ki se ai.
One of the greatest benefits we have when we come here each year
Hiai mun a kum tenga ipai khom aphat ma kia ka thei tu.
is not the Indian food, which I like very much.
Ki ko kong pai hiai ya India te an kha lim ka sama ma hi le huai sia ka hi ke ya kong pai mun na.
It's not the traffic, which my brother took thousands of pictures of.
Ka sangam pan kha India traffic ka lim sang khat wa ala ka ya huai sia ka hong pai nuam ka ke wa.
And it's really not even these sessions when we're teaching.
Hiai kha no kon hil na hun pe nu silai kon sin sak sia wa hong pai ut le ka hi ma sak ke wa.
It's when we're able to sit down and talk to you.
Hi ma le itut khom a iki holing chiang ina
We go through the interview process, and yes, we have a responsibility back to those who support you to report back.
interview bang ine a elemo puang na ine ya a hi ke le huai la mahon chom tu te to kisaya thu le la igen chiang bang ina
But you're not just a preacher or a picture on a wall.
no kha preacher hiam lim kila mai mai dinga thu na sem na hi ke
You are people just like us.
hi le ka mu chu no le ko ma ma a mi ne vi ba chi
And the more we talk to you, the more we find out that all of us have gone through some very difficult times.
no to iki ho ta ma le na hak sat na te bang mi thei chiang a kha ui teng chu hak sat na ke nei chia te ve chi kha kam
And that makes you real to us. And I hope it helps build our relationship personally with you.
wai hak sat na i thil tu ki bang ten kha ko ading ina no kha mita tak na hi na on thei chana wai kha hon ki nai san so ai
So the book of Job, as I had mentioned before, I'll put these chapters up here. The book of Job is really the bulk of it is in chapters 4 through 31.
hiai zop lai bu kha hiai ya gen bang ina hia thu tuam
As I mentioned, the first couple of chapters are written in a narrative form, very easy to follow.
abul tung lam kha igen tak sa ma bang tang thu dan hong ki ke la hi sia ki na thei siam ma
And then starting in chapter 3, really, it changes to a very poetic and symbolic language.
himale bung tum yong tung chiang ina wai tam thu da ki gel pen aki gel da long ki ke kina la pau pia na hong ki gel ina gen te na kam pau ang ki gel na athu kha apai dan agel dan
It's like the Holy Spirit came and grabbed my brain and just shifted it a little bit.
wai kha et sang na kha siang thok ka lu tu nga hong pai ni chiang hi in wai kha bung thum na hi check kan hon he ke apang
And says, I want you to think deeper.
wai zia ka hu chi bang on hi chiang kha na ngai to na kha thup jo se ma ngai to ani on de ka
And I'll admit, this is one of the reasons why people don't study in depth the book of Job.
hiai zia ka hi di nga ke le tel thoi na mi tam pin kha hiai job lai bu asu chiang na asu thu di bang na asu thu ke kha se
You run through the first couple of chapters, you may get chapter 3, which is very depressing, and then it just goes on, and it's hard to keep your thoughts.
bung khat bung li na atang thu kisinin athei da na ki ke in bung thum na kha ki lung lu no lo azia kha waya thu gen na bang le ke ne ko no azia kha agyang ki khe wai chia
So what I want to do in this lesson is I want to spend some time right in this discussion between Job and his 3 friends.
tu ji kala ka hi nuam a hi le ye bung li tos pan som thum le khat ki kala job le lom te ke na ki pan se lai bang
And I want to introduce you to these 3 friends and just talk about their first speech.
hiya ya kha alom thum te thu gen ma sa te kha ka hon gen nuama
Because I think you can see a little personality with them.
huai ya kha amau mi hin zia dia thu gen wa ki pan i the the khen kha ta ma
And if you understand that personality, you can see Job's response and his frustration.
hiai kha amau mi hin zia le amau mi hin na di i ai le zopin huai dum zo adon na te le i mu the di na
And all of this time, just remember this, all of this time, there were things going on in heaven that Job did not know about.
hi le le hiai azop din mu na ding in ki ko le hiai i ge na ta na thil tung teng teng kha zopina the khak lo wa na thil thu pi ta ana tu mo ma hi chi khai lu si
There's 2 different worlds.
hoveli ngai dan ni ana ki pu
Job that is causing, it has a lot of problems, and his friends who were supposed to comfort him did anything but that.
hi zop kha huai thil ni te kal te to a omin thil tam pi thua kin ama pan pi dinga alom te le the huai kha bang ma ahong khamwan the na diu bang ma um to alom
Actually, what one commentator wrote about his friends,
commentator bible suit hil chan bu khatina alom te to ke sai hi china na ke na
what Satan couldn't do with all of the physical torment to Job,
setanin ahi thei zop tung taksa haksa na atung sakte teng teng
His friends were able to almost do it in the covering of comfort.
Setanin taksa tung haksa na atung sakte bang kha alom telle wai hi thei za kha azop tung kha tung sak haksa na tung sak.
So if you can study these three individuals, and it's really interesting to study where they're from, but we won't have time to go into that.
Ya long thum te kha ko yang ki pan chi te kha su thei sao pia o mai ma li wai te din ni nei ke ya.
But remember the period of time that they think the book of Job actually happened.
Himalaya job lai bu bang huna thil tunga hi chi kha ngai tu le.
Many believe that the book of Job is the oldest book in the Old Testament.
Mi dam pi ten kha hi job lai bu kha thukul lai lui lai bu te la ka u pa pen ding ina agil ta wa.
And he lived during the time of Abraham.
Abraham hundu vela khosa ki ding ina ngai da aneiwa.
We don't know that for sure,
Himalaya I thei chiam ke ya.
but it helps paint a picture for us.
Himalaya wai da na kha ama thil to le thil pai da kha imu thei da kha da mai.
So I was talking to Nathan, I always call him Lance. I was talking, you call him Tom. So I was talking to Lance this morning at breakfast, and we were talking about the book of Job. Did I say Nathan?
You said Lance that time.
Nathan.
Tu jing kalina unau pa ne than chiang la so lai bu kha ka yen kho wa.
It's just so natural.
Mi nai.
And what he did in his Bible that I did as well, and I would encourage you to do,
Ama Bible ka et ahile aman anahile ke le ke Bible ka kha wai dan kha no le nahi bi mun kha kon han thon wa ma
highlight who's speaking where.
wa ya amanahi chu kuan kha koi muna thu ge na hi chi te kha ana highlight ma ana chiam te a.
So I'm going to show you the chapter structure in just a second.
Wai ya kha hi achap abung pai dan kha ka hon gen wa ma.
But if you do that, then you'll know when you read a passage, you can go back and say, who said that? And you'll say, oh, it was Job, or it was one of Job's friends, or it was God himself.
Wai na hi chiang una hi aban na sim tom chiang a thu ki gen he o hi kha zok thu ge nei ve hi kha alom thu ge nei ve chi kha na thei siam nau atang bo sim top lo ni hi le wa ya akwa ge na chi kha thei siam wai ma ma.
So the structure of Job is really like this. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar are his three friends that come talk to him, and we're going to give an introduction to those three friends in a second.
Hi alom thum te Eliphaz Bildad le zok parte kha ama hong han thon jang pai alom thum te hi wa.
And there's three sets of speeches in chapters 4 through 31.
Bung lia ki pan bung som thum le khata kha ase ina alom te thu ge na om dinga.
And after each time these men speak, Job replies.
Hi alom te thum ve hon thu ge na khen khat te wa kha zopin adon na hong om dinga.
He does it again.
Ahon dong no na.
And then he does it the third time.
Thum ve kha again wai kha ahon dong dinga.
And one commentator wrote about Zophar, finally he shut his mouth.
Wai ya kha hip chan tu ka din chu atom na kha Zopharin kha bang ma din no lo chin dai di de mai hi che.
I'll make these charts available. It's not one that I have, but I'll make sure that they're available for you.
Hi ka chat kha na nei ding hon pe di ka hi ya ka nei.
But if you understand who said it, then it will help put it into the context in which it was written.
Wai zia ka hi zop lai bu na sim chiang un hi na sim pe du kwa thu ge na ya chin chiam te de de wai khana thu thek siam na hon bat pi ma.
So all we have time to do really this morning in this lesson, I want to introduce each one of these individuals and talk about some points that they made in their first speech.
Tu jing kala tom chi ka hi chu alom thum te thu ge te tam lo lo el dinga.
And so Eliphaz is the first one, and I believe from the statements that he makes, He seems to be the oldest and the most respected.
ya Elifa kha thugen ma sapeni a thugen te ye chiang kha amau lom thum te la kha a upa pelle a alom dang ten aza tat penu a hi dan kha a thugen kam pau
Initially, he seems to be sympathetic towards Job, but quickly turns to be arrogant and very condescending.
abul tu nga hon gen tu ngina job hin khwa a ek chiang ina he pi wai asama ma a himali hon gen chiang a kha wai job he pi na sala im la na ina a hon gena.
And then he demands Job take his own counsel. As Job is talking about him being innocent, it is Eliphaz that says that you need to take up your own counsel.
Huchia hong kyo chiang wa kha jopin khat ke kha ka ket na lo ai chi chiang au kyo to ta to na huchia nang dik ta wa nai le kwa thu hin pan pi na poi mu a chi kha a hon chia.
And so we'll just look at one verse in chapter 4 and verse 7 of Job.
Bung le tang sag gi yen chol dinga.
He says, remember now, whoever perishes being innocent, or where are the upright ever cut off? His point is, nobody who's righteous has been punished like this.
Dia tang sag bung li tang sag thei gi ge in ka hon nge na hi hoi hi na pia mang thang ngei kwa a hi thei a hi ke le koi la ya a hi mi di sa thia na o ma che ya alom pa na ge nom chu chi lom lo dik ta mi hoi dai mi hoi hi chi bang bang kwan thwa kim nge ya.
And then he becomes very cruel. We talked about him Job losing his children.
Wai bana kha jopin atate asun na alom pa thu gen kha ahung khel wai ma abanga.
And look at verses 8 and 9.
Tang ge le tang wa le ha.
What he says in verses 8 and 9 is it is because of you, Job, that your children perished.
Tang ge le tang wa I ai le na ta te na sur khanang zia ka hi chia hi.
The Apostle Paul talks in one place, sorrow upon sorrow.
So da polina haksat na tu haksat son na.
This is a good example of our already feeling the pain and then feeling another level of pain because of that.
Ya alom pa thu gen na zia aman atate ting akwai na ba na wai akwai na zia ama mo na hi haksat na tu haksat son.
He insinuates, he says that he has gotten all of this from a special revelation from heaven. He says that he believes that Eliphaz got this advice to give Job from a special revelation from heaven.
Ya Eliphaz job athuil na nang cha amo sak na te kha aman pathian na akipa na thei na nei da na pathian gen sak da ni.
And he ends this series of advice to Job by saying, you deserve.
Wai zia ka ya alom pan again to advice a hon zo in chin hiai na thuak ting kha thuak tak ma na hi a hon chi hi.
Job did not cave in. Job did not, he stood his ground with Eliphaz.
Hi ma le zopin kha wai pom thei kia Eliphaz ge kha pom thei hi.
Then in chapter 8, we are introduced to Bildad.
Bung ya da ye to mo de na
He seems to be even less sympathetic to Job.
on gen to cha zop kha on he pi na hong to de de yib la de de.
He said, you're just talking and just wind is coming out of your mouth. No sense.
Mumalo na kampaw de na gidiktat son bang ma hi lo hi. Mo wi nung bang le la hi.
In the U.S., we call it somebody is a windbag. He just talks.
Wai ja na mo gen na mo kampaw hi.
And then he asked Job a question. Well, when has God ever provided judgment to somebody who had not deserved it?
Huchia alom pan ahon gen tu huchia god tak lo pathianin kwa god ngai hi mi ma ya chi kha zo kon dong ani.
Bildad speaks as one of authority, as you continue on in chapter 8.
Ya Bildad thu gen kha thu nei taka mo hon gen ahon gen na.
And then he compares the natural world and the natural order of things to the natural events that happened to Job.
Khover thul tung dik tak tak te pan salina yai mi hingin kwa zop thik tuak te kha ahon te kho mai.
And then we get Zophar.
Wai ban na Zofar in ahon gen na
He provides the strongest chastisement, the strongest chastisement. You know that.
hiya zoparin kha tai hil na hoi pe ni chi ya ma tai hil na khau pe ge na
He says that he has heard enough of Job, and all of his excuses are very shallow.
zob kha thei hun tok ma ake sa wai je kam mi dik kai cha so lam te kha azuau mai mai hi
Now, do you remember the scene?
hi le le zob tok ke sa ya thil tung khana si ma mang hi ke leo chi
Here's Job that God calls righteous throughout this whole process.
hi ai ta na pathian kha zob mi dik ta chi pa hi
He's trying to figure it out.
aman kha bang ja ka hi ai tho kai chi thei u
As Satan and God are watching the events down there and watching Job struggle,
zob agim thuang na te teng teng setan le pathian in tung lama ki pan en
Job is trying to figure this out.
zobin bang ja ka hi chi thei khiat so
And so he misquotes Job and attributes some things that Job says that are not true.
zob thu gen ma pan sana agel lo pi gen sakdan kha hon mo sa along pan kha
Look at chapter 11, verses 4 through 6.
bung som le khat tang lia ki pan tang buk el le han
He puts these words in Job's mouth as if Job is looking to God and saying, I am completely innocent.
hiai kha zob kam pau da na hon gen in zopin pathian lama kha en tawin chin ke ka ik lo na ong lo hi chin kha zopin achi ki chi na hi chin angwa
He says in verse 4 that he's mocking Job, and he says, Job, you are telling God, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in your eyes.
zob kha chiam ni bo nan nei na ka thu sin sak na te le ka om dan te siam tho hi chi na hi chi chiam ni bo nan along pan ang tai ai
And then he says, God's going to answer you.
huai ba na kha hiai da na ki dik sat ta ka na om kha pathian ni kha hon dong dia hi pathian vai hom ton
He continues, this is Zophar, he continues and says, Job, your sins are so numerous that nobody can count them.
huai zia ka hiai along pa zo parin hon gela na ke na nak tam lo ma mai che kwa man sim seng lo yong chi
These are the friends that came to comfort him.
hiai te kha ama ha khamuan ding ang pa along te om ge nai
Verse 7 starts another argument talking about, can you search the deep ways or the deep things of God?
pathian thil hi the na le pathian te na mu the ya hi hon chi khum lai
Trying to tell Job that he's thinking in the wrong direction.
huai zia ka zok nai tua na khan nai tua na dik lo hi hom chi sak te te tai
He calls Job an empty-headed idiot.
mi hai ngai tua na nei lo
Look at verse 12 of chapter 11.
bung som le khat ta som le el le han
He says he's an empty-headed man. For an empty-headed man will be wise when a donkey's colt is born to a man.
mi hing the siam na be in the siam na anei ding mi hing asabil tung no wa ki pana piang chiang in mo nang the siam na nei lo the siam na khan na nei the hun di kha mi hinga ki pan sabil tung hong piang chiang chaw the siam na nei di cha hong yeng
And just like all three of us throughout this process, they demand that Job repent.
hiai te teng teng alom te thu ge thu job kya na ki si ya hi cha ya ong ge alom te
So you can go back and look at these charts yourself and develop these characters when you study.
hiai chat de kha ilam na pai chiang a en thak thak ul lan mo su thak leu te ka hon dia
Job responds to each one of them.
jobin kha alom te teng thu ge na do ki ka
He comes to a breaking point with his relationship with his friends.
huchi na alom te to akizop na de ahong tan pha ahong ma
One of the things he says in chapter 7 and verses 20 and 21,
bungsa gi tang som ni le khata ahon thu gen khat kha
he says, you're going to be sorry when I'm gone. You guys have missed the point, Job is telling his friends.
wai jan no khaun thei siam lo na hiu ka si chiang a kha thei siam pan di na hiu
But you know what's so remarkable about this story?
giai kha bang chile
Remark.
remarkable kai
Chiam pet tuak mama.
hi thu ke ka chiam tu ma ai
is that Job thought God had completely forgot about him.
Jobin kha pathianin mang hi dim dem dan na kinai tu
Job thought God had punished him for something that he could not figure out what he had done.
aman Jobin ahi her architect lo zia ka bang yam khat pathianin god ek hiding dan nai tu na ane
But what's remarkable about that,
Himalaya to kisaya chiam te tu tak ma tu
God was actually using Job as an example of faith.
Himalaya pathianin Job kha gin om na midang te hik na ding anasat anai ta ya
And we ought to be so grateful that God did this to Job.
hi chibang Job kianga pathianin anahi kha eya ki pa huai lo te la hi
We ought to be so thankful that we have an example like this from Job.
Hichibang example Job hin kwa imu te kha ki pa huai ma ai ti ai
Because none of us will ever have to go through this.
azia tu hichibang kha en itua lo te na ding na ma
Again, he answers Bildad very similarly.
huchida mangmai kha bildat le Job pina on dinga
And Zophar as well. I'm just going to go through this quickly.
Job hal le wai dan ma on dinga ya ke konen to zo pen ma dinga
I've already quoted this. One commentator said that what Satan could not do by taking away Job's wealth and destroying his family,
Job setanin kha Job ne le lam teng teng le a in kwan teng teng asuk sia nunga ahi Job lo
Satan would accomplish through the counselors of his friend.
alom te tung to ni na setanin atup tu kha asutam tung the hi alom
In chapters 26 through 28,
bungsom ni le ko ka ki pan bungsom ni le ya ta
Job makes some comments about his friends and about his God.
bungsom ni le ko ka pan som ni le ya ta kha Jobin kha alom te to ki sai ai ki le pathia to ki sai kha komena on bo dinga
Then I
ke no ni dinga
I chose 3 verses that kind of represent Job's thinking as we're going through this.
ya alom te along na atang thum kha ka hon ending a wai ti akai ko ni kha
In Job 29 and verse 2,
Job bungsom ni le kwa tang ni
he says, Oh, that I were in the months of old and the days in which the Lord had watched over me.
o ni dang lai kha te banga om hileng pathianin ahon ve lai te banga om hileng
Job's mind starts going back and saying, I wish it was like it was before.
wai zia ka Jobi na hon gen tu ni danga ka khosak the lai wai ka hun pai sat te dana om the hi ma leng chi kha wai alu pu
And he's thinking about how it used to be before all of this tragedy.
he hak sat na te teng teng tua ma om dan hin kwa te kha angai ma hi
Look at verse 30, chapter 30 and verse 1.
bung som thum tang kha ta elle ham
Chapter 29, it talks about the years before I was a highly respected man. Now in chapter 30 and verse 1, I'm a laughing stock. People laugh at me.
ya ni danga hiai thil te ka tu ma mi teng tengin hon za ta ko hon thulang ma hi inga tu kha mi hon nu san mai ma chen bung som thum tang kha ta hong gen ni ai
And then chapter 31 and verse 1, Job shows his innocence.
ya bung som thum le khat
Chapter 31 and verse 1.
bung som thum le khat tang kha ta kha ama mo no na kha hon gen ding
So I'm going to explain why I have this chart the way I do before we get into making the application.
hiai te ka hon hi na zia kha i hin khwa i tu technique te ka hon gen mai na hiai ka hon gen ding
I think these verses really lay out how Job is thinking through this process.
Hiai tang thum ten kha zopina hiai athil tua to ke saya a et da kha hon gen khom vekhin ka ngai tua.
I used to live like this, chapter 29.
Bung som ni le kwa ni danga hi chibanga ana khosa hi inga chi.
Now I live like this in chapter 30.
Himale bung som thum na tua la hiai dan mun le la khosa hi nga aon chia.
But 31, he's just going through a series of trying to figure out what happened.
Bung som thum le khata bang zia ka hiai tua ka hi dio chi azia kha aon ngai tu ai.
What did I do to deserve all of my children dying and all of my possessions being taken away?
Kata te teng ka khwai na ding bang an hi kha ka hi dio ai kile ka le la teng la mam sak ding bang ka ana bor khial kha ka hi dio chi kha ahom ki ngai tu.
And if you have your Bibles open, look at chapter 31.
Bible na ne bung som thum le kha ana el leo chi.
In the English, I don't know how your word structure is, but in the English, there are so many verses that say if.
English no pau bang china ke le dia ma chi ka te kia English version na ke khat if hi khale ana hu chi khale chi dan thu mala oma.
He's trying to figure all this out.
He kha athil tua te kha bang sia ka hi dio chi kha thek nuam
Verse 5, if I had walked in falsehood.
tanga thuzuaw banga ana kha hi zen zellen achia.
Verse 7, if my step has turned aside from your way.
Kakal suan te na nga kipan bang ana pial mang kha ka hi zen zen ale.
Verse 9, if my heart had turned and was enticed by a woman.
Kalum tang kha heya nu me no na khem kha bang an na khem zong bang ani kha zen zen ai.
If, all throughout this chapter.
Again te teng hu chi bang ana kha hi zen zellen chi ngen.
This is Job at the end of the discussion with his friends.
Hiai kha alom te teng to aki ho so nu alom te tu gen ma ama ong pau khia tai.
I am so grateful that all 42 chapters are there because you put yourself right in his discussion.
Hiai ta bung som li le li nik tan an ong kha ki pa wai ka sama ma hiai thil tu te kha na lu si mo hoi ta ki na ngai to thak leo chi.
So what I want to do is make 3 points.
Hiai kha thil thum kha e ko ne ki nu ma.
It was really hard to summarize chapters 3 through 37 or whatever the chapter was in just one lesson.
Bung thuma ki pan hiai tan kha lesson kha chawa tong kim ta ka hon gen kha hak sama ma ahia.
But I've tried to teach Job almost verse by verse, and everybody's asleep.
Himale zob lai bu ke cha atang kha ka him cha mi te ki no ni mut san.
So I'm going to give you overview, and you take this back,
Along pin ka hon gen ding anong ilama en thakul la.
and you'll be so enriched if you will study Job in detail.
Wai zia ka zob kha hoi ta ka sur leo te patua mama la hin ko patua mama dia hi.
So I chose 3 sayings that Job did that I think represented his view of God and view of himself.
Zopin kha athu gen thu aman pathian amu dal le ama ngai tu na te hon gen kha ya ka thei thu ka la nga.
I call this weighty insights of a tormented soul.
Kha agim mo akipan sidek signalim guam akipan gil ka huai mu chana.
As I said, when someone has experienced a very dark tragedy or at the point of death, their mind changes.
Chi ma bangena mi kha sidi hial kho pa sidi din mun ta ka haksan na ta khon tua hial cha angan ton alung sim thile dan ke ke.
One of my best friends that I had for 40 years passed away about a year and a half ago.
Kum som li bong kalom hoi ma khat kha kum khat le kim ve pai sai na hona si sana.
And he was able to speak very well up until 2 days before he died.
Asi ma ni ni ta ni kha hoi ta ka thu le gen the pa the na ma.
He didn't talk about his car.
การตกใส่ข้าเกณฑ์ข้าเฮ็ดเกีย
He didn't talk about his garden, and he played sports. He didn't talk about sports.
อามาข้ากิมอลมีเฮียสปอร์ตตกใส่เลเกลลอยนะหัวนบอลเตเลปังมาเกณฑ์เกียสิมาเกณฑ์นั่นเกณฑ์
This was a faithful Christian that knew within a few hours he will see Jesus.
อามาข้าคริสเตียนกินอมตัดดาบการบังจัดตันเฮียมาเจสุมุกิเกดิงาฮิจิอาเกตมุดิงาฮิจิอาเกตเฮจิอันมา
Wouldn't you like to hear the words of a tormented soul?
หุ่นจีบังอาสิงเงยดิ้งจิกิเฮจิอันเตกับเปล่าอิสอุทิยา
The first thing is in chapter 29 in verse 18.
บุงส้มนี่เล็กว่าต่างส้มเล็กยัด
Chapter 29 and verse 18, the quote is that I shall die in my rest.
กับบุกสิไม่ดิ้งอาเจีย
Like we talked about in chapter 29, he's thinking back before all this calamity happened, before all this disaster had happened.
เดน่าอีเกนตาบุงส้มนี่เล็กว่าอ่างไงดันคันนี้ดังเขาสักดันเด็กข้างไงไม่งอยโอมาฮีบุงส้มนี่เล็กว่าจิข้าอีเกนตา
He thinks back when he had this great relationship with God.
ปัทยันโตกิจกนั้นไอ้ตักเนี่ยยินกว่าน้องตัดอาจักไหลเด็กอ่างไงตัวน่าเขามา
You could see that he recognized that the benefits and the blessings that he had came from God.
ยาอยากกิปันจุวาร์โซนอะไรหาไว้หำพักนะอามุเตติงติงปัทยานะกิปันให้จิข้าอาเทจิอันมา
Back then, there was a peaceful time and he could not see on the horizon.
ฮิวายหุนาข้านวมสมามา
He was admired.
มีติงติงนายสัง
And the first few verses of the entire book talk about not only did God respect him, but all the people that lived in the area that knew him
อาบุ
respected him.
ตุหงกิปัตนาต่างต้องจิกเตียอีเกนตักซาปัทยานินอามามีหอยมีดิกตัดอาฮิอาจิไม่เกียเลหิโลอาอาเตนคอมปีเลไว้กำเต็งเต็งินอ่างไงสังป่าไว้
It doesn't say so, but I would assume that he thought he was just going to die a peaceful death.
ไบเบิลินตัวเกนเกียฮิเลเลกังไงตัวน่ะข้าทนเกนเลนคุจิบังปัทยันตัวกิจกน่าหอยตักนี่ไอ้เจ้าน่ะข้าสีบังเลนวามแต่ก็สีดิ้งอ่ะกิงไงตัวไอ้ดิ้งกักินตา
And I think that's what he's saying here.
หวยอ่างไงตัวน่ะมาข้าเฮียยาคนเกนหินตัวไหนตัว
I wish that I would have died in the peaceful times.
ไว้เจ้าก็ฮิเจ้านวมแต่ก็สีข้าอุ้ยมาก็หิอาคนจีอาเจียหิ
But the Lord had other plans for him.
ที่มาในปัทยานินอามาอาดิ้งอ่ะทิพตุตัวมันนี่หิ
And we are so blessed here in 2026.
กุมสังนี่เลยสมนี่เลยบุกินข้าวหวานส่วนนั้นตั้งปีเดียวงา26นะ
We're so blessed that God and Satan intervene into his life.
อามาหินขัวปัทยาเลสตันอานากิเฮลอานาเกจตัวอินาออกมา
We're blessed because he didn't die peacefully.
หิมาเล
นวมก็สักลายตะเกียนนาสีสมัยเล่ง
นวมก็สักหลายตักอินอานาซีฮิโซไมเลงอาจิเปลี่ยนเขาไว้ดันอานาซีขาดลูกขาทุนินเอียดีอาหารถงไปมาลีนวมสัตกะอานาซีลูกว่านวมมาสักหลายสิ
So that's an application we need to look at our own lives.
ไว้ข้าหินขัวบุญตัวสมเลย
We want to die a peaceful life.
นวมมีสักหลายแต่ก็นวมแต่ก็กิสิอุจจาระ
I live by the ocean.
เกยขัดตุยปีเกียงอาเต็งกันเฮีย
And I have some friends that come visit and they don't want to go in the ocean because they think they're going to be eaten by a shark.
ลมเต้นของเหตุเจ้าเขาไว้ตุยเบียบอกอูดโลอาจจะข้าซากินอันนั้นเขาเลยจีลาวเสก
That's not a peaceful death.
อาจจะเขาไว้ซากินฮอนเนกาซีค่ะนวมแต่ก็ซีนาอยู่ไว้
But we picture that in our life. But maybe if we go through some trials, it's good for us because people watch and see how you're doing.
หินขัวบุญตัวเลยหังค่ะฮักสัตนาเฮียมทวงนายองเกเทตะกะอมเลหิไม่เทฮิเลเลไว้อิทิลตัวเตะปัทยานี่นะยังมีดังเต้นอามุเทนะดีงาเอียดีงาไว้ทวงอิมตะกะอิโคสัตเปอันนั้นไว้สอนเลยเท
I've already mentioned my son losing his daughter and the way he and his wife dealt with it, never missing services, but just dealing with it with honor and respect for God, made such an impact on our whole community.
Hiya kataten atanu asun thu kana gen kata a wai atanu sululung gi mahina jen pia huai zia ka khop na khat vele pe khalowa omun chin huai a pathian lam nai jok na ni kha aki ma kia na amau the khate kha a influence on ma ai
The second thing, as I move along here,
ani na ding na
what he says in chapter 26, he says, I know the mere edges of God's ways.
bungsom ni le buktang som le lia ka yai te athil hi among lel a hiu chi khathe aon jai
We in our modern world are so proud of ourselves because of technology.
tu lai na khover te ya technology tu min kha ikisathe ma manua mi sama ma
Look what we can do. We can communicate all over the world.
itili te ter khover pi to nuam ta ki ho zia zia the ta
I don't think that's a great influence on our children a lot of times.
himale itate ading a kha influence hoi lo chu hi ge tuan khollo
But it seems that man is continuing making these discoveries about medicine and helping people live longer.
ai ke le khover pil na tung to na dam doi te mu so ai mi adam the na dingwa ai ke le mi dam sot sak the
And they're so proud of themselves when they go and the scientists discover a new bird that they didn't know existed.
ai ke le vasa o mai lam le the lo khat bang hot mu su chiang ma scientist te bang kha ke sa the ma ma nuam
They name it after themselves. They name it after themselves. This is a rust bird. This is a Roberts bird.
wai zia ka wai avasa amu su te bang ama mina kha amin peza je na tam ko pi ma
They're so proud of themselves.
mi ki tu pi sak ma ma
So what man does is he searches and he finds things that God had created 5,000 years ago.
himale mi hing ten hon zong zong a huai khat khong a hon mu su te kha pat tian kum sang a paisa na bol khit khong le la hi
Isaac Newton was considered a genius in his physics.
Isaac Newton kha physics ading a kha mi thu pi ma mo mi chi tua ma i the ya
He didn't discover gravity.
gravity kha ama hon bol so mo khilo wai chu
He said, when I drop this, it's going to hit the ground at a certain speed.
wai bana kha hiai kha ama mu su hiai heleng kha hiai mun dek suk de hi chi hele la hi
God created that.
hu chi banga om dia pathian ana bol sa hi
God decided if you throw a bowling ball, you throw a ball out of an airplane, that it's going to gain speed all the way down 32 feet per second squared, by the way.
pathian ina na bol dan kha le na ki pa ni na bol khe suk le o la ke din hat de di in 32 feet per second
Squared.
square kha hat dia wai kha pathian ni ana bol sa hi
And the point that I'm making about that is we're so proud of ourselves when we come up with these complicated formulas about if we drop something, it will accelerate faster and faster. So when it hits the ground, there's a disaster.
hiya ka gen no pen ta ka hi le thil bang khat ikiat sakai le hong ke suk din hong hat de din hong hat de na to na sot akiat suk ta na kha asuk siat zo le tam di chi kha imu so tiang ba mi te thu pi ki salo te lai chu
God just spoke gravity into existence.
pathian ni gravity na bol in chin hu cha om dia na bol hi le lai chu
And we're so proud of ourselves.
himal en wai te cha thu pi ki salo ma ma mo
And I think that's what Job is saying here in this second point.
hiai ma kha zopin kha apoi ni na again no mai
I just know just an edge of what God's existence is and what He's done.
ka the kha pathian thil te la among lel pen ma ana hi le lai ve chi khan
I just know, he says, the mere edges.
among lela hi chi thei ka hi
And there seems to be no answers to Job.
wai zia ka hiai ta na le azia kha pathian ni adon na mo ina om ke ai
You talk to young people, they have all the answers, but they don't have any knowledge.
tuai lai te thil dong leu te na dot na teng tengu answer thei vek du hi le thei na nei lo
You talk to older people who have gained a lot of knowledge and they know they don't have any answers.
hi ma le dot na na bor chiang a upazo ana su tam a thei tam ma te dong leu te kha a thei um lo ti adon na le hon dong nam
The smarter
เลย
we
เทเวกเดียว
get,
a thei luat jia kwa ma a thei luat jia kwa kha thei lo hon chi
the smarter we get, the more that we know that God's ways are not man's ways.
wai jia a I thei tam deu le o banga pathian ngai to na tu mi ngai to na ki pang lo chi kha ke thei thuk de deu
And the last thing is chapter 19. He says, in all of this, I know that my Redeemer lives.
bung som le kwa tam som ni leng nga ki ban som ni katan pa kha hi na hi chi thei chiang ta
I don't know what Job understood about the afterlife or eternity,
zopin kha isi nunga ai kele tam ton thiu te bang chi tana the hi chi kha I thei ka thei ke ya
read verses 25 through 27.
bung som le kwa som ni le nga a ki pan som ni le sagi sim din katan pa a hin chi le atop chiang in leitunga ading non ding chi ka thei ziakin ka vun hu chi bang a hi sia da om khit nung in hima le ka sa a ki pan pathian ka mu ding he kei ma a ding in ama kei ma in ka mu dia ka mi ten a ending midang hilowin ka sunga kalum tang asi dang hiang hi
I know that I will see God.
pathian mu di ka hi chi thei ka hi
And I don't think he's talking about his presence before God in the next few chapters.
About it ai le kha pathian maya vodi I ka hi chi gen hin ka ngai to ke
After all of my skin and after my life is destroyed, this one thing I know,
ka hin hwa hi ai tu ka suk sia a om nunga hi ai ten ka to nunga le thil khat ka thei tu
I know that my Redeemer lives.
katan pa tu hin gi ke hi chi ka thei cha
So when you're in your deepest hour, you need to have some type of hope.
wai zia kal taka hak sa taka dim taka yo buna lamet na ine dia hi
You can hope for a doctor.
ai ke le da tor bang lamen ding
You can hope that your friends come and comfort you.
ai ke le lom te bang hong pa ya hong khamwan ding lamet na
But you can get so far deep in this world that nothing can help except for heaven.
hima le hi ai kho vel aksan na te kwa ma in hon pat pi thei di mong mong lo hi ai ka haksan na zo pathia lo hon pan pi thei lo ma hi chi ta na kha I thu ngai to na
And that's where we need to be.
wai ma kha I ngai sun na om di da ma hi
But unfortunately, most of us don't volunteer to go into this place.
hima le huai nuam isak na di ada huai ma mel kwa ma kha huai van kam tung u ta ki volunteer u thiom loi
Life brings us into these places.
hima le khovel pai da mi ngin huai kha huai mun tum tho dia
All throughout Job's discussions with his friends,
zob alom de to hong ki ho tok na den ta na kha
especially near the end of the discussions that he's rebuttaling them,
hiai a hong ki ho na to ta na kha a hong niam din dinga
he demands to be in the presence of God.
pathian om pina pathian om na muna om kha
If I can just talk to God,
pathian ho pi thei hi nge le
he's not answering me.
amal la hon dong lo
He demands for God to see him.
wai ja pathian non ki mu pi nge de chi kha hon di ma nai hon ngia
And that's our next lesson.
wai kha in next lesson dia hi